Hey everybody, it's Frodan. I am awake at 4 a.m. getting ready for rehearsals for the EU Americas Championship for the Hearthstone Championship Tour this weekend. So I figure while I have 15-20 minutes before I have to head downstairs to the hotel lobby, I just want to record this deck tech that I've been playing on stream. It's a Naga Druid, which is really fun. I built this myself about 3 months ago, and I used it to climb the legend on the Chinese server because I was noticing a ton of aggro. And I remember one of my friends just kept telling me that Ramp Druid's always good when you see a lot of like board aggro decks, whether it's like paladins or zoos. And while to a certain extent I can definitely see why this deck is decent against it, it's the more important thing is that it's really fun. And I know the Old Gods expansion is on the horizon. Everyone's really looking forward to Standard. But don't just fall in the traps of feeling like Hearthstone is just more like a net deck central. This deck definitely has a positive win rate. It's around 57%, and that's enough to hit Legend. It's definitely not as optimized as like the 65 plus range of mid-range Druid if you want to climb the Legend really aggressively. But without further ado, let's not stall any longer. Just walk it through. So the main core of the deck is built around this idea that we want to be able to ramp really effectively with Naga Sea Witch and Aviana. These two cards are amazing to be able to combo off of each other, but let's explain it as we go through just card by card so that way you can get an analysis of what I'm doing these days and why I really like this deck. So Innervate is the first card here, and the reason why people play Druid is to play Innervate, cards that are similar to it. It's such a powerful card for tempo, which means being able to develop something onto the board usually at the cost of your own hand. You're just trying to dump whatever hand you get so you get the strongest board possible. Oftentimes you see Innervate into, Ancient of Lores or Innervate Emperor Thorson and then just get like a bunch of powerful combos afterwards. But Innervate usually is a dead card as you get later into the game. Innervate's really strong early on, but on turn 10, usually like Innervate's really weak. However, in a deck with Aviana, because you can Aviana and you play Innervate out, you almost guaranteed get somewhere up to 20 plus mana worth of tempo on the board, which is insane. There's been times where I've been able to play Aviana on turn 9 or 10, and then play like Ancient of War and Dr. Boom, and all of a sudden it's like, how do you stop that? And there's also like combos where you play Aviana, play Ancient of Lore, and then you get an Innervate off of that Ancient of Lore draw, and then you can play two more minions with like Sludge Belchers and Natural Drake. It just gets really nutty really quick. So I love Innervate having usage later on in the game, and not just like, well, I hope I get it early and hope I don't get it late game. So I love the versatility of that Aviana draws out of it. Raven Idol is a really interesting card that I chose to include kind of as a joke at first. It felt like I wanted to have early game plays. One of the biggest criticisms against Ramp Druid is that you have a lot of late game plays. You just look at the curve. Look how many 7+ cards that I have. It's just 7. That's more than it's basically like more than a quarter of my deck that's dedicated to 7+. And then if you take like 5+, it's half my deck is 5 mana cards or higher. So there's a very high chance that I draw nothing in the very stages of the game. And I felt like Raven Idol was very consistent with giving me options. And I usually use Raven Idol to discover spells. The reason why you want to discover a spell and not a minion is that spells give you a higher chance to draw quality Druid cards. If you look at some of the spells, Moonfire is like 1 damage for 1 mana. Pretty weak, but it gives you some versatility. Claw is okay. Living Roots is great. Even the cards like Naturalize and Mark of the Wild, Power of the Wild, like these cards actually do have a lot of synergy with your deck. Mark of Nature, I can't tell you how many times that saved my butt where I attached it to cards like Azure Drake, even Sea Witch, and make it a 5/9 taunt, like build my own Ancient of War. It's just the fact that Discover gives you the choice of what you want. Versus minions, you can get neutrals, and you might be stuck with like Secret Keeper, you might be stuck with Mana Wraith, and like all these random cards, Illuminator, they're not going to help you at all. So there are situations where you want to try to discover a minion, and I feel like I put it in the gameplay examples on the YouTube that I'll explain later on. But the minions are only if like you're lacking quality of your hand, but spells help keep you safe early on in the game and give you ways to respond to the board, because this, just like any Druid deck, you really struggle to fight back on the board once someone's taken it from you. Or at least you can fight back for a board, but it's really hard to do so without conceding a lot of tempo. Wild Growth, really straightforward. It's a card that helps you ramp up into the early stages of the game, and late game it cycles. Not a bad card at all, especially for a rampy style Druid. Very, very effective. And you'll see a lot of streamers and players complain that Wild Growth is just what you want early game. And this kind of feeds into Darnassus Aspirin. Darnassus Aspirin, I played 2 originally, but the 2 felt like it really wasn't effective unless I was facing a lot of aggro. The fact is, I do play a lot of mid-range Druids and Secret Paladins on ladder, and this card can be really good against it as well, but I also feel like if you draw Darnassus Aspirin in any midpoints of the game, or even late stages of the game, it really sucks. I really want cards like Sunwalker onwards when I start hitting turn 6, and I never want to draw this ever again. And I don't have a way to convert it either, to make it even good. Versus all of these other cards late game still have use. Darnassus Aspirin is kind of like on the fence of just being quite useless outside of being a body to fight back on the board. And even then, when I have more mana, I'd rather have some bigger quality minions. So 1 is important because it helps fight against the board. It also has a chance of ramping too, really effectively, into a lot of taunts that you have in your deck. So you might be able to protect it. Wrath, extremely versatile, one of my favorite cards in Druid, just because like the Wrath timing is a really important thing to use. A lot of matchups you want to keep Wrath if you can just use hero power, because you want to be able to Wrath things for 3 to stay alive. Remember, you're going to be drawing a lot of heavy cost cards, so a lot of times even if you like Wrath for 1, you might end up not playing a lot of those cards because it's just a slow deck to dump your hand. So just stay alive early game. This deck is so strong as the game draws out because you have so many threats. Just really take your time and evaluate the use of all these early game cards to stay alive. This is the whole purpose of this curve from 0 to 2, is just to stay alive. Big Game Hunter, because it's really important to use this to remove. Druid doesn't have access to easy removal. Very straightforward. Important to note that it's still really decent against Secret Paladins, and even like the fact that people still play Dr. Boom frequently, Big Game Hunter will always be relevant. Mind Control Tech was my 3-drop of choice. I also considered a few other ones, Grove Tender being one of them. It's just because it helps, when we both ramp, it helps me a lot more than it helps my opponent, but I wasn't really feeling the Grove Tender. I even considered cards like Mounted Raptor and also even the Earthing Ring Farseer. These are all like potential ways you can replace if you don't have Mind Control Tech. It's 100 dust. I don't really feel like it's really that bad to like spend it on it, but if you're really cheap and you need a budget version of it, Earthing Ring Farseers are pretty decent because you have a lot of synergy with healing your minions. You have like a lot of 5 health costs and above. Look, all of these are like 5 health, and because you're trading into most likely 3 to 4 attack minions in the very beginning stage of the game, you can Farseer and heal your own minions for tempo, or you can go ahead and heal yourself if you're in a stage where aggro is burning you down, which is surprisingly effective. You don't think the 3 health really matters, but sometimes it's the difference between winning and losing the game. Swipe is just so crucial. You definitely need some basis of more spells to impact the board. I don't play things like Starfall or Poison Seeds just because I don't feel like they're really effective, and oftentimes they just cost a little bit too much mana to be able to be effective with the rest of my hand. So I tried it out, not loving it. I'd rather just have Swipe, more versatile. Plus, it might be game-ending damage if my opponent's unsuspecting. Keeper of the Grove, very, very important to have. Just the silence to make sure you don't die to Tyrians and be able to take care of Sylvanas. The extra 2 damage is incredibly clutch against aggro. A lot of Druids still love this card. Azure Drake is important for the spell power synergies and also to draw some cards. You want to be able to keep a steady flow of cards because you want to be able to benefit off of a lot of the synergies with ramp. So a lot of times Azure Drake is like a mini Ancient of Lore. I use it to sometimes combo with Aviana, so I can use it with other cards if I have Innervate. Just keep that in mind. The card draw is definitely more important than the spell power, but sometimes it's okay to just have Azure Drake as well. You can replace this with a Harrison Jones if you really feel like the weapon meta is getting too crazy. Harrison Jones, by the way. The reason why I go through a lot of these basics that some people already know is because not everyone's played Hearthstone, and there's a lot of new players that are still getting into it. If you can afford to splurge into Harrison and you feel like you're facing a bunch of warriors and paladins and rogues, go for it. Why not? Naga Sea Witch is my favorite card in this deck just because it demands so much attention. It's a 5/5 for 5, so already it's like Lotheb stats. It already has like enough to contend against Sludge Belcher. Sludge Belcher is a card that still ran very popular in a lot of metagames. Sea Witch just trades really effectively into it and kills off not only the first but the second body, and it stays alive as a 5/1. A lot of people were like sleeping on cards like Stranglethorn Tiger, and the reason why is because the 5/5 for 5, which gives it optimal trading because it's stealth. Stealth means you can choose whatever attack you want. Just gave a lot of problems for cards. Even like Shredder doesn't necessarily want to trade easily into a 5/5. They have to add something else, which not every class has access to. The fact is, when you play Sea Witch, every card thereafter is just every turn thereafter is just a threat. Like, I might just play Boom right after one turn earlier. I might even just play Rafam, and then even the artifact that Rafam gives you costs 5 as well. Every card costs 5. So the Mirror of Doom, the Hour Piece of Horror, or whatever the card you pick, the Lantern, that'll cost 5 too. You'll see in the games. What happens is sometimes I play Naga Sea Witch. Well, I play Archthief Rafam on 9, and then I play Naga Sea Witch plus whatever card afterwards on 10. And it just gives a lot of ability and flexibility for tempo. My favorite combo in the game is to play Naga Sea Witch, and then my opponent can't kill it off. Maybe it becomes like a 5/2, 5/1. Then I play Aviana for 5 mana, and then everything converts to 1. This is not a permanent effect. It's more of a stacked effect. So if you play Naga Sea Witch first, and then you play Aviana second, instead of all your minions costing 5, every minion will cost 1. So if you play Naga Sea Witch, you play Aviana on, let's say, turn 10, you can innervate out 2 more minions, Ancient of Lore to draw, and an Ancient of War. Like, and everything is fair game. Really fun stuff. Highly encourage you to experiment with it. But keep in mind, the sequence matters. If you play Aviana first, and then you play Naga Sea Witch for 1, everything will cost 5 afterwards. So just be really, really cautious and sequence it properly. The one thing I also want to note is that innervating out a Naga Sea Witch is usually, like, before you hit 5 mana crystals guaranteed next turn, is usually pretty risky. If you're on like turn 3 and you have Innervate and you're like, oh, my hand says Innervate Sea Witch, turn 4 you might not be able to do anything besides hero power, which is sometimes damning for a druid. So that's like the one downside of Sea Witch that I don't really like. It makes a lot of these cards, Raven Idol, Wild Growth, Wrath, a little bit clunky, but I think the upside of being able to benefit off of Sea Witch is just game ending. You might just tempo the board and you'll never relinquish it. Sludge Belcher, because I felt like I needed taunts. If I don't feel like Sludge Belcher is great and I want to be slightly more aggressive, I play Druid Claw. Because a lot of times the Sludge Belcher is just important to stay alive. Again, turns 1 through 4/5, I just want to stay alive. Feel free to just replace Sludge Belcher if you don't have Naxxramas and you don't really want to, like, you want to adapt this deck for standard in the future. Druid Claw is more than sufficient here. Emperor Thorson is so awesome with Aviana. It reduces her to 8 mana, and also it reduces Sea Witch cards to 4. So if you play Naga Sea Witch and then Emperor Thorson on curve, everything turns into 4 mana, which means if it stays alive on the following turns, you might be able to even play 2 more threats as time goes on. It's also, again, the stat line is great. It's really powerful with like cards like Raven Idol. Raven Idol for 0 gives you so much flexibility. You can save Raven Idol for, you know, a rainy day when you really need it the most. Sunwalker is a tech card. You can replace it with a lot of stuff. I only played Sunwalker because I was hitting so many druids, and I felt Sunwalker was a really powerful way to stay alive against druid. It always forced a hero power out of them to absorb the damage and then be able to push for it. Feel free to replace it with almost anything. I put in Black Knight at one point for sure. I put in Barongeddon to kill off paladins. I put in Ragnaros to try to finish off freeze mages. I've even put Kael'Thuzad. This one's a really fun card to play, but the thing about Kael'Thuzad is I felt like it was too slow. Plus, I was playing Darnassus Aspirants, and there was like all kinds of scenarios where like it wasn't exactly synergizing perfectly. I would be a little bit hesitant to replace Sunwalker for like Ysera and Nefarian, because these cards are like really expensive, and the reason why Sunwalker felt good is that it felt flexible. I could innervate it out early on like turns 3 and 4 if I needed it with the coin, but at the same time it wouldn't sit there dead, and it still has like powerful Aviana synergy because it can protect Aviana. So Sunwalker was just like this idea. You don't have to be married to it. It's definitely one of the more flexible spots. It's dragging on, so let's go ahead and run through the rest. Sylvanas, pretty straightforward, just board control, and again, it forces your opponent to trade into it, so that way you clear the board. I use Sylvanas as like a pseudo form of AoE, but again, she's not the most crucial card in this deck. Feel free to replace her. Ancient of Lores, I debated about putting 1 or 2 for a while. Same thing with Ancient of War. These cards are somewhat synonymous because they function similarly, even though they have different roles. Their spot is to swing the board very decisively on turn 7, and Ancient of Lore's flexibility to heal and draw 2 cards is really important. The gas against like Control Warrior, you really want to be able to keep it up. And also because Aviana synergy is great. You play Aviana, you play Ancient of Lore, and you have an Innervate, you can put out 2 more threats. So just keep that in mind. Ancient of Lore is one of Druid's best cards. I fully anticipate this card getting nerfed by Standard, but I'm not sure if Blizzard will go fully through with a huge nerf. Maybe just reduce its stats a little bit. If it still draws 2 cards and it's a 4/4, I still think it's pretty good. But I'm not sure. Again, I don't know. I have any insight into the nerfs as well. Ancient of War. Ancient of War is a card that surprisingly I uproot it very often because I end up playing Aviana. I end up playing like Sunwalker, Belcher, and then all of a sudden I don't need another 5/10 taunt. I can actually just push for lethal with that kind of stuff. So don't be thinking that you only taunt this up, even though most of the time, like 70-80% of the time, you will be doing it. Maybe 90% of the time. But the reason why I say I uproot it a lot is because usually people never uproot. So even getting 10%, like 1 out of every 10 games, is pretty frequent. Boom is just great. No need to say anything else. Boom is just best legendary for its stats and effectiveness. Arts Through the Thumb, like I said, combos with Naga Sea Witch, and also just because it gives some real finishing power, the Discover flexibility. Again, you want a lot of options as Druid. So if sometimes you want to clear the board with the 10 damage. Sometimes you want the 10-10 Lantern so that you can push for lethal. 10-10 Lantern is basically like a 10 damage Pyroblast. Just consider it the same as doing a lot of damage. And then, of course, the Mirror of Doom is great against board control for decks that you need to just commandingly pressure and don't have access to a lot of AoE. So just play around with it, get experience. It's not an easy, intuitive card in the very beginning, but you'll get better with it. Lastly, Aviana is bae. Aviana is love and life. She's got wings, and she's a total babe. So I gotta go. They're actually calling me to go downstairs to the lobby right now. Hope you guys enjoy this deck tech. Subscribe to the channel, and watch the games. See you guys next time.